The preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Laura Kaminsky, Lecture Program Consultant, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 92nd Street Y for tonight's program, Artist's Visions, in which Judy Pfaff will discuss her work with you. The format for tonight is as follows. In just a moment, Judy Pfaff will come out on stage and make a brief slide presentation of her work. Following this, she will be joined by series moderator Patterson Sims for a discussion of her work and its development, as well as how it fits into the broader perspective of the art of our time. The final segment of the program will provide you an opportunity to ask your questions, which you may do by writing them on the index cards you received upon entering the hall. During the course of the evening, ushers will come down the aisles, collect your cards, and bring them backstage for presentation. Our series moderator, Patterson Sims, has flown from Seattle to be here with us tonight. When we originated this program several years ago, Patterson was the associate curator of the permanent collection at the Whitney Museum of American Art, a position he held since 1976. This past November, he left the Whitney to assume the position of Associate Director for Art and Collections at the Seattle Art Museum, a loss for New York, but a gain most definitely for Seattle. And for Patterson, a much longer commute to the 92nd Street Y for the series. We're delighted that he's able to travel so far to participate in Artist's Visions. Our guest this evening, Judy Pfaff, was born in London, England, but was educated largely in this country at Wayne State University in Detroit, then Southern Illinois University, Washington University in St. Louis, and finally at Yale University School of Art and Architecture, where she earned her MFA in 1973. Perhaps best known as a sculptor, Judy Pfaff's works are represented in the permanent collections of the Whitney Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Albright Knox Gallery, among others, and has been shown in group and solo exhibitions at the Holly Solomon Gallery, the Tate Gallery, the High Museum of Art, the Cranbrook Academy, the Paula Cooper Gallery, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and countless other galleries and museums throughout the world. Her work has been written about in Art News, Art Forum, Art Week, New York Magazine, the New York Times, the New Yorker, and just about every important arts journal or newspaper in existence. She is best known for her complicated environments and installations. Her three-dimensional constructions transform space in dizzying landscape events, which can be both inviting and exciting at the same time that they are overwhelming and frightening. This past year, I have had the opportunity to become acquainted with Judy through our work on the Board of Governors for the New York Foundation for the Arts. And I can only say that if an artist's work is in any way a reflection of his or her personality, Judy can only be likened to the first part of my description of her work, inviting and exciting. And so I ask you now to join me in welcoming Judy Pfaff, who will soon be joined by our overwhelming and frightening moderator, Patterson Sims. Thank you.
I don't have a brief slideshow. I have a little bit more than brief. I'm not good at following the rules. But what I will do is go through the slides very fast. And I've seen them before, so I can really go through them fast. What I've done is Patterson asked me to be a little historical, meaning pull out some slides from kind of sources and resources. And I went to the Modern today to buy some slides, and they had one David Smith slide of a QB series, which was not what I wanted. They had one Stuart Davis, which was out of print and didn't have it. So what I've thrown together is a little, it's not exactly what should be flashing, but we'll do the best we can. So I've divided these kind of introductory slides, which are not mine, into three kind of different periods, and it's totally fabricated. Okay, so I'm going to start. Oh. This is La Strada. And I think, I'm not sure if there is in there, it's supposed to be an Alexander Calder slide, but there was something about the circus, there was something about happy, sad, and I think I thought I was Gelsomina at one point. I mean, there's something about the way she sort of so kind of out there and lost. And anyway, when I got out of Yale, it felt a little bit like that. I was in painting when I was there, and Al Held was my teacher, and he was the only one I talked to a lot. Because he's sort of from Brooklyn, and he's sort of from the street, and he made a lot of sense, and he kind of demanded me to stop being this person and kind of pay attention to what I did know. So anyway, I don't know. I think I pulled these slides years ago when I was first teaching, and I don't even know why. But there is something about this kind of attitude, and a kind of fantasy, but basically not so much fun. Yeah, this is tingly. This is a machine that probably destroys itself, and maybe during that process makes drawings. I thought it was so wild. That kind of work and that kind of freneticism. This is a ceiling painting, Chinese, in a cave. And I think it was all this kind of continuous narrative, no beginning, no end, storylines sort of flowing, no real one point perspective. And maybe you know this. That's what I wanted, With this slide, I remember thinking, I don't know if I like the pieces. I just like all of it. And there was something about the work that I began doing, which was not just an object in the middle of, the room. It was scattered and all over. It's always depressing to see artwork after you see, my stuff after you see those kinds of slides. But this is a long time ago. This is in '73. And this was my beginnings as kind of plotting out some territory and experimenting. So I'm just going to go through fast. This was the year of aluminum foil. Some of this is paper and styrofoam and wire things. Usually there's a kind of corollary drawing activity. Most of this stuff kind of rambled across the floor. This was in California, actually, and when the doors opened, things kind of rolled around. Drawings tend to be multiples like this, a lot of color. This is contact paper on the floor. These drawings, there are a couple hundred of them. I didn't bring those, but they were all figurative, and they were sort of the beginning of where I sort of begin my work. Yeah, so all of these images you see are people in some sort of activity, usually not happy. Yeah, even though there's a message with the color and with the kind of activity in some way that it's lively. It's sort of lively, not lively. Full, but lonely. I don't think those kinds of things were ever seen in the work. There's just too much of it usually. This looks pretty empty, but for certain shows in New York, it actually was pretty full. I didn't see the work as one, many pieces, but as one piece. And there was a kind of linking that things had with looking at each of the things. This is 78. I think this piece was called The Italians. The other one was called Prototypes. This is a tricky slide, but I got a grant this year. This is in '79, and this show is at the Newberger. And the space is 100 feet long, 50 feet wide, 30-foot ceilings. It's big. And all the work was basically linear and transparent and not massive. And I had no idea if that kind of imagery could hold together the space the size of an airplane hangar. But you'll never know what it looked like. But I think what it looked like is there was a kind of fission that happened. When you walked in, it really did spin around, and there would be little figurative tableaus which would yield to another tableau. Anyway, it was real nice company. I was with Laurie Anderson and John Borofsky and Ree Morton and Scott Burton and good people. It was kind of my debut. These are details. I'm sorry, some of these slides are out of focus, but it's probably the slide's fault. Next phase, I went to the Yucatan. And with that work, there was a lot of stuff that I was beginning to read about myself, which was that it was explosions in glitter factories, the color was in bad taste, that it was, just stuff that really hurt my feelings. I was this Yale graduate, and bad taste was not what I was involved with, yeah. So when I went to the Yucatan, I thought the world is in bad taste south of the border. So either, half the world is wrong, or maybe, the East Coast in its, in this ghetto that we live in, it might be wrong in what those things like color mean. I don't know, I just found that. But there was something about nature, yeah, and pretty violent nature. That this was a slide from Hawaii. There was also this kind of nature, meaning nature, but certainly guided. This is in Japan. This was supposed to be a ship, and this is a monk's place, and that was their only sort of way out, is this kind of vision of this tree ship. Anyway, so that kind of madness, wildness, and that kind of tameness and manipulation of nature interested me. And then I started to make these big drawings which looked like explosions in glitter factories. But I thought they were, unlike the first work, which was basically, I can't focus these things. Built up in a kind of constructivist way, right angles. The work suddenly became very circular and much more lyrical and much more about the landscape and air and water. Figuring out how to go from straight lines to curves was major. It's funny, Nam June Paik, I don't know if you know him, he was on a special tape, an interview with him, and he was talking about this work that he was making, which was made up of all of these TV sets, making these robots. And he said the toughest part was finding two similar TV sets, which I thought was really funny because everybody else was talking philosophy and incredible stuff. And he's saying, no, the genius is finding these TV sets. For me, just changing materials, big deal. It was a big deal. It also, this shift of meaning felt like a big deal. What you're looking at basically are these kind of bundles of rattan maybe and vines, and they were all soaked and manipulated into these clusters. Nothing came about that way naturally. And the gallery is painted to augment and fatten up this kind of bundles, yeah. This was called kabuki. I always thought part of me must have been Japanese. And then I went to Japan and I found out that was totally invented on my part. This was the Whitney in 1981, yeah. It was called Dragon. And what I wanted to do in this space, Patterson knew me then, and he watched this thing try to become this thing. And it was pretty wild. I mean, it went up 18 feet and through the ceilings. And, you know, I wanted to figure out if I could make this small space. It wasn't that small. It was... The slides are funny. They smash everything together. But to make this space feel hot, and that's all I was interested in, is if I could have this sculpture, or whatever this is, sort of kind of change the temperature. And with each of the pieces, there would be some kind of thing like that, some structure like that I would try to do. So each piece, no matter how similar it might look, actually had a specific motive. These are the drawings. They're pretty big. That drawing is the one to the extreme right over there, so you can sort of see that they're big-ish. This was in Cologne, and Patterson and I were just talking about it. This was a show that was called Westkunst, Western Art, and it was a survey from 35 to 81. It might have been 39 to 81. Anyway, it had the best art you can ever imagine, but it was so depressing, and I don't really know why. It was billions of square feet of, you know, Schwitters and Picasso and, you know, Warhol and Hockney, every artist. There were no women. I was in kind of this corridor, this annex, and I think Jenny Holzer might have, she worked with Peter Naden, but we were actually not in the real show, in the historical show. We were kind of the young upstarts, along with Robert Longo and Schnabel and Baselitz. It was an interesting time, but very, very depressing. Anyway, I don't know if you can tell, but the work got a little wilder there. This was called Ziggurat. I came back home, cooled down. I gave myself this little retrospective in Sarasota, Florida, at the John and Mabel Ringling Museum of Art. Meaning that I started out with these kind of earlier motifs and then went into this kind of still life to much more heavy nature imagery. This show is called Rorschach. I tried to make these wall pieces, yeah. I was throwing everything away. Nothing of what you've seen has survived, not anything, except the drawings. This was another show. I think you can tell, I hope that each show there's like something is getting sometimes darker, lighter, heavier, more more internalized, more external. I threw in a lot of these kind of working slides just to sort of show you just mechanics. The man in the blue t-shirt is Bill Wixon, who was my assistant for a couple of years. Earlier, there's a man named Julius Kozlowski, very talented artist, both of them very talented. Now I work with two women, and mostly there's just a lot of physicality. There's a lot of building. Some shows I've done by myself, but it's very difficult because of the logistics, just moving material and stuff. The woman down here was a woman from Buffalo who helped out. This used to be the Clifford Still room. So a lot of what happens, because I'm on the site, is, you get information from wherever you can. This was at the Albright Knox. And there's the best abstract expressionist American painting there. So Again, this kind of working situation. This is basically slides of the finished piece. It's called rock, paper, scissors. This is Venice. I made all these tubes for Italy. They're supposed to look real Italian. And the work got lost and didn't show up until after the opening, so it was really this bizarre show. But Italy is always a good time, you know. You eat well, everyone's terrific, but things don't get done quite the way you think they might. This piece was called Either War. There were 2 wars came about while I was sitting on the dock. Falkland Islands and Lebanon, it was really wild. I was also raised in post-war London, and I used to hear a lot of stories from my grandmother about the war and about the sounds of war. And it ended up that these tubes, which I thought were going to be quite upbeat, tended to get a little nasty. Also, it was in some place that no one ever saw, so it didn't matter. The last installation I did of that kind, meaning that it can't be, you know, these are all throwaways. So this is the last throwaway show that I did. It was in New York, Holly Solomon, name, 3D, innocuous title, but it was everything I knew about dimensionality. And it had sort of, it probably was a kind of swan song in a certain way. It was so jammed and claustrophobic that in a way, I think if you saw it, you'd sort of know that that was it. And it was. I'm very good with contact paper. You're looking into a corner. There's one more tray. I'll if I can do this even faster, so just hold on. I started making these smaller pieces. You know, they have various levels of success, but there. And you can see they're stuck on the wall, and they have these planes. Now, you don't think Frank Stella popped into everyone's mind? I think there's something kind of terrible about the art world that I knew even when I was in school, is territory gets owned by artists, which I don't think is fair. And I think it's a phenomenon. Maybe it's always been that way, but I don't think so. It feels like the Cubists had a lot of shared information. It feels like the Constructivists had a lot of shared information. It seems that, you know, Eva Hesse owns latex and fiberglass, and Richard Serra owns steel and lead, and I think Stella owns 3 feet away from the wall. So I still have to deal with it, and thank God I didn't find any slides at the Modern to show you, because I end up giving Frank Stella lectures. But I think even so, you can tell that there's a kind of range that's a little, hopefully it's different. Also, I think I'm kind of, I don't think funnier, I think I'm more handmade than he is. I mean, I know that's true, but, and that isn't goodness or badness, but there's, you know, each piece is constructed a little differently than the previous one. I don't tend to do series that have a consistency. A lot of these are out of focus, but you don't need to see them. This one, the fan moves very slowly, and it pulls these kind of tree images, and it creaks like crazy. It's not nice, you know. This was called Noche. The whole series was called Badlands, of which this one was also one. A lot of landscape imagery, a lot of trees. If you see a tube, it's a tree. So. That's the same piece from the side, just to give you some sense of how it organizes. Tubes, trees, forest. This is actually in Spokane, Washington. It's a complete failure. It's in this city hall. I think they're mortified. I don't know. See, I thought it was going to look really benign, you know, because there was a lot of whiteness, and I don't know. It just same place. You walk under this stuff. I mean, I'm not asked to do many commissions. These are parts to a stage set. That's sort of what it looks like without the dancers. I can't get slides with the dancers in it and how it does relate. This relates to bodies, I don't know. But, this is Leger. It's not me. I'm crazy about his stuff. I just love it. What has happened with the newer work, and I don't know how the slides, what the sequence is right after this, but the work is much more graphic. There's no painting, throwing paint around per se. If there's painting, there's this kind of painting. It's very precise and, you know, plainer, but still kind of muscular, I think. And okay. I don't know where this came from. I don't know. It's Mondrian's one of the last images. I think it's Broadway Boogie Woogie. What I liked about this work is like he was sort of on this, you know, so pure, got so pure and so down to the, you know, the most rudimentary things, and then he came to New York, and it really messed everything up. He sort of had to figure this whole thing out. And I like that the work is as lively as that, also as graphic as that, and as explicit about New York as that is. These are the new drawings. They're done on signs. They're kind of cleaner. They're in groups like this. They're sort of notebooks, sort of studies. The drawings always come before the work. This is a jump. I'm in Japan. This is a studio I was given in Japan to make the parts. It's me making parts. It's a great anvil, isn't it? Do you see that anvil? They don't make them like that in America. This is the space we were working in. This is Bill again, and Yamazaki-san, and Hiroshi. After the floor is laid, it was done in layers. We had 10 days to do this. Then I come in and I cut it. It's like a huge Japanese woodcut. Like the Japanese didn't understand that at all, but that's what I thought it was. And it had to be, you know, painted and the imagery figured out where it goes in about 10 days. So this is basically the finished product. It's in a space that's quite like the Guggenheim space, sort of mirrors the Guggenheim space. I thought there was a lot of ikebana in it. There's also a lot of signs in this, which if you were, there's, this says river, these three kind of pen, it says flat, 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 it's kanji. From signs I got there, they're sunken and camouflaged into this whole motif. There are lots of little words like pachinko and mahjong and mountain, forest, tree. But I think, I might be kidding myself, but it's the beginning of this kind of cleanness that I'm sort of talking about. Again, the floor is inlaid Formica. It's not contact paper. It's very physical. It's very much there. It's a lot more technical. There's a lot more engineering going on. It was kind of pretty, like in parts. This So that kind of meanness, I think, really dropped out of the work. I don't know where it went. I think I just was, some things just change, and that changed. So I think this is lighter and easier. And the work since then has been. Again, this kind of, you should be seeing slides of Stuart Davis now, and, Liechtenstein. A lot of messages with this, kind of American sign stuff. Also, you should be seeing signs of Brooklyn, streets in Brooklyn, lights in 42nd Street. A lot of these look to me like tableaus for restaurants or some sort of signage, even if it was explicit or not. This was a show again at Holly Solomon. She moved uptown, made me nuts. I can't fit the work in. So it sort of looks too big for the space, and probably was. That piece was called Apples and Oranges. This one is called Champagne. Susie Q. The Whitney bought this piece. It's called Supermercado. It's sort of like that slide I showed you of the Yucatan, actually, all of those kind of plastic baskets. And it was something about making this abstract stuff kind of fat and buoyant. Not this one, but that last one, that kind of fruit imagery, kind of fat, opulent, American. Jean and Corinne Dan. It's called Superette. These are some prints that I've been working on. This was at the Whitney. Oh, blew me away. It was a very hard show to be in. The sides on these pieces look pretty interesting. You can't tell really from the slide, but you can at least tell it's complicated. Again, this kind of fruit imagery. The name of this piece was NYCBQE. A lot of people, it looked really like a bull in a china shop. It did look out of place. It was out of place. Anyway. The Whitney is such an interesting showcase. It really is about the time, and if you're out of sync or, there's something very interesting about it. Anyway, this is a new piece. A lot of hardware. I'm proud of the hardware, that's why you have 2 slides of the hardware. This was a piece underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. These are the last slides. A lot of neon, a lot of this kind of, again, sign imagery, kind of desolate sign imagery. This place has 50-foot ceilings, and it's underneath the Brooklyn Bridge on the Brooklyn side. It's so fascinating if you ever go over there. They have performances and music and sculptress Jean down here. She makes sure everything stays up. There's some sense of the vaulting and the amount of bricks and stuff in this details. So that's where you are, under the bridge. This is my favorite slide. That's Jean and Corinne. It looks so medieval. It's my last slide. Okay, thanks. I don't know what comes next. Is Patterson coming up here? Ooh. Oh, okay.
Judy, as we could really tell from your slides, you've made an amazing amount of work. And you made this pretty clear in some of the slides and some of the things you talked about, that your work kind of connects you with a sensibility. Some of us can see Schwitters in your work, the wonderful German artist who made his sort of Merzbau, this sort of house of collected objects. But there's another kind of a strain that you seem to deal with in your work, a strain that kind of connects Stuart Davis, Alexander Calder, David Smith, Frank Stella, and Judy Pfaff, all in one sort of strain of sort of the spirited American abstraction. Do you kind of consider yourself part of that lineage, or is it something that you can say, well, it's there, but I don't really buy into it necessarily?
No, I think that would be like a real pleasure to be part of that. I mean, I always liked the idea of being in a family and in a line of thing, and that idea about things, I don't know if it progresses, but it certainly continues, yeah. But no, I would love, I mean, that would be like heaven, you know. I think that's what's so funny, because I think of myself as a stick in the mud. And sort of, I mean, it was funny that the only slides I found were sort of old-fashioned, nostalgic sort of slides, and not, you know, radical works and involved with, like, really the avant-garde. I mean, maybe it'd been the avant-garde at that time, but not certainly at this time. You know?
How conscious of that history were you when you started out making your work in the mid-'70s? I mean, did you really know Calder? Did you really, I mean, you really knew those people and you thought, they're great and that's where I want to be?
I didn't know them, like study them or know them, but I don't read very well, but I look at a lot of pictures. So I really knew them. And actually, Al Held, when the Whitney has the circus, and they used to have it downstairs. Mm-hmm. And right before he was dying, he wanted, it was Al's idea actually, to get the Whitney to pay someone to learn how to move the objects, because it was really a performance and not just the pieces. So he was thinking of me, that I should meet him, and because I always loved that work. And I sort of, looked at that that little video that he has, film. And so I knew and looked at enough photographs of that. Oh yeah.
Have you ever had a chance to touch any of the pieces?
No.
We should,
you guys will love it.
I'm no longer there, but I mean, I'm sure I can try to arrange it.
But no, so I did know that work. Yeah, I did know that work. I knew it, as much as anyone can.
You've just invoked Al Held's name, and I know he's really been an important teacher for you. He was teaching at Yale. Judy graduated in 1973, and it seems to me that very quickly after your graduation, you really became a very mature artist. Can you sort of explain or talk a little bit about some of the forces at Yale which conspired to kind of allow you to be fairly full-blown very shortly thereafter?
Well, it's funny because that sort of isn't what happened. When I was at Yale, I was a painter. And probably I got the painting prize, so I guess they liked it, And when I got out of there, I stopped cold turkey painting. I mean, nothing. I couldn't, no brushes, no oil, no nothing. And I was, involved in oil. So you might remember this, but I just sort of did little wire things and had plasticine balls. And I mean, Al came over and thought I just lost my mind. I mean, it was like sort of going from a pretty established portfolio. I mean, a school portfolio, but, you know, paintings and looked presentable, you know, like you'd studied somewhere, to being a complete, you know, like someone just meddling and keeping busy. It was sort of like sewing, you know. And he was still my friend, but I think he was doubting if it would last very long. So it took a while to establish where this new territory was. So when I got out of Yale, I hit bottom. I mean, bottom. And I didn't know where to begin again. So it was just these years of sort of just moving material.
But you were living
around.
in New York at that point.
Oh, yeah. And I met, you know, we talked about it before, I met the best artists in New York when I came here. Elizabeth Maury, you know, Joel Shapiro, Alan Surratt, and Linda Benglis, and Ron Gorchov, and Charlemagne Palestine. I mean, you know, it was easy then. Everybody was nowhere. So you could drink with it.
But the sculpture thing obviously hits you very hard. And you never really, I mean, you make two-dimensional work, your drawings are immensely exciting.
Yeah, I'm probably still a painter.
Yeah.
You know, I don't, especially when I talk to sculptors, I'm not a sculptor because I don't understand painters either. But at Yale, what it felt like with painting, and it still seems to be true, is that kind of history with it and that kind of language about it, I couldn't find a way in. Everything felt like it was never going to be as good as Matisse or as good as Piero della Francesca. And I'm thinking, you're right, you know, or as good as Calder. I mean, it's, you know, they're right. But when you become a sculptor, they leave you alone. They don't even ask you questions. You're just out, you know, you're just being busy. So it wasn't threatening, you know.
All of your sculpture is all of your three-dimensional work is very referential of a flat plane that's behind it, the ceiling, the floor, the wall primarily now. So in a sense, would you be more comfortable if people said, oh, Judy Pfaff, she's a great painter or a great sculptor?
Stella says he's a painter, and that is very provocative, and it gets people wild.
Do you believe him?
No. Yes and no. But I think he's a sculptor now. I can tell. I can smell it. He knows a lot about it. And he's sort of saying, if it is sculpture, it's very good sculpture. You know, I mean, he's sort of getting into it. But I think now he's you know, the physicality and the kind of casting and it's really engineered to new pieces like crazy. So yeah, I think he's becoming one. But I think we both have this very plastic sense. I can flatten things out faster than anybody I've ever known. I can also pop things out. I sort of have this ability. It might be a problem, but I sort of can't make flat things stay there and can't make thick things stay there either. I think it's just a way of making it lifelike, to have it be.
But now, if you were going to try to answer that question, would you say you were a painter or a sculptor?
Probably a painter, except my welding is getting so good. I don't know. And lately, I don't know, you can tell there's a real editing down, a real kind of choosing a palette that's not really as illusionistic. It's just kind of structural.
One of the issues that became really clear as we were all looking at your slides
David Smith said
together.
painted sculpture was
was
the better than either one. So you know.
And he started as a painter too.
Yeah,
I mean, so many
and in a way,
sculptors.
you can still see that there's a kind of a one-sidedness to his work. You know,
there's
and a
always
kind
a
of
dimension you're supposed to look at it from.
Yeah. Notice how they install it in museums. They smash it up real close to the
wall.
wall. Yeah. You know. But yeah,
One issue that sort of fascinated me, and it became so entirely clear in looking at the slides, was was a big moment in your work, maybe 5-6 years ago. Maybe I've got the chronology a little fouled up, but you said, I'm not going to make these three-dimensional room environments anymore. It's over. I've done that. I've knocked myself up. And I saw you at biennials just working insane hours, like looking more and more kind of stretched out. Every hour that I would see you working with assistants, bringing more and more stuff into the museum so that our registrar was going impossible. But there was a moment when you decided, I'm going to make remountable pieces.
Yeah.
Was that a compromise?
No, it was I still make big pieces that get thrown away. The Brooklyn Bridge piece, obviously. The Whitney piece.
You threw that away?
Well, it's not thrown away, but I mean, it might as well be thrown away. I mean, I've got it now, but you know, the piece in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like I don't do big pieces anymore. There's something about the activity of throwing things away. It made me feel like I was very crazy.
To keep throwing your art away.
Keep throwing, you know. My history was in a box of slides. You know, it was just a funny way to, like now it's interesting to see like a drawing from 5 years ago and I can reevaluate it. There was no way it kept me a performer. It kept the work kind of interesting in this way that was never taken on. As soon as I started making objects, it was very interesting. The nature of the criticism changed. Where I was in relation to everything else changed. There was the marketplace that changed. There was the way in which the work was there and had to be sort of judged in terms of work which is there and not as like a movie or something fun that you went to. You know.
So overall, you say people took your work more seriously.
I don't know if they didn't like it better. They liked it worse, and they saw it as a great loss. You know, like it was interesting before. Now it's uninteresting, and it's not original or whatever was said. You know, but for me, it was absolutely like the sanest thing I ever did, the most healthy thing I ever did, and it wasn't about selling out. I did those pieces for 4 years before anything sold. As a matter of fact, it felt like I just, sort of got lost. If you don't do environments, forget it. That was your little niche. Yeah.
Well, now, I went to Japan and went to the Waco building right after your piece had come down, and it was interesting. This is the big piece in Japan, in a building that's called the Spiral Building, that Judy equated very correctly with the Guggenheim, or sort of abbreviated version of the Guggenheim. That piece was very controversial. I mean, it seemed to me like to be the most perfect metaphor for the way Tokyo hits you. They didn't like it.
And they didn't understand it. They didn't see it. They thought it was, I don't know. It's funny because another artist who followed was Robert Longo, and they were crazy about that work, which I think is pretty tough and pretty brutal in certain ways, and certainly aggressive and not sensitized. And this was completely in response to Tokyo and everything that I had, experienced there. So it was very funny. The Japanese have a very curious way of looking at modern art.
But they actually took it down early. I mean, they were really disturbed by it.
Yeah.
No, they were very disturbed by it. It's so fascinating because it's such an amazingly beautiful use of the space. Now, switching here a little bit, I've observed you as a teacher, and one of the most satisfactory times we had together, and a wonderful time was in Banff in Canada. And it was amazing the way you interacted with the students and just made them feel their best selves and had this kind of rapport that was very intense. Can you describe just for a second the sort of challenges and the pleasures of teaching?
I think if it's just teaching, if teaching is just about teaching, not even teaching, talking, taking you for real and talking about what you do, given the way I'm looking at it, it's so easy. It's a piece of cake, and it always works because you're not being destructive. It's administration and other faculty, that the makeup of the environment I find deadly and awful, and I always make trouble without knowing it. But I think interacting with other artists is unbelievable. There's so many good people. You know that. Most of the people we were talking to, they were young women, a young man also, but they were in fiber, right? And they made fantastic sculpture, and none of them sort of could make sculpture because it terrified them. But they could make sculpture in fiber. So a lot of the talking is obviously sort of figuring out why there was that funny idea about the terror of sculpture, or I mean, it was just sort of interesting.
Now, you've also become kind of an authority or a power in a certain way, because you've become a person who juries exhibitions and also makes choices about artists who will get grants. I know recently you worked as one of the panel for selecting who would get the Guggenheim, the wonderful award that happens to, and $25,000, I believe, goes to extraordinary number of people in a variety of fields. But the visual arts are always looked at with great concern by artists and also people such as myself, because it's one way that a lot of money goes into the hands of a person. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you make those choices?
It's so weird. There were 5 people, and Jasper Johns being one of them. And you'd be surprised how conservative you are. Especially with a Guggenheim grant. I don't know what it means to everybody else. Myself, and I did get one. I got one basically right when I did my last installation, and it was to sort of set up with welding equipment, and there was like a change in my life that I needed to do, and it was the economics were such that I needed this money, so I applied for one. And it also felt like it was a long shot. It was a real long shot, and I was very surprised I did, because I thought I was too young to get one. I was probably 38. So I found I looked at it, this work with a kind of conservatism that surprised me. I really thought the grant should be maybe for people who had just made a dramatic turn in their life, who had a good enough body of work that they should get a grant, whether it's spectacular or not. So it wasn't like, do I think these are the best artists in the world? That really was not much of it. Also, you're working with 5 people from 5 very, very different points of view. So there's a lot of compromise. Doesn't feel good to be on a granting. It doesn't give you pleasure.
You've done it though more than once.
Yeah. The NEA was great. We gave out more grants because we said, so how many can we give? And they said, there's no ceiling. And I'm saying, that's a lie. There's always a ceiling, And they said, there's no ceiling. They said, the 6 of you can't agree on more than, 3% or 5%. I'm thinking, nah. We gave out so many grants. It was like 8% or something, And that was a pleasure. We gave out grants to people who were 90 years old and who were 22 and, who were, from all, people who were great teachers, lousy artists, great artists, lousy teachers, young ones, interesting, wacko ones, conservative ones, figure painters, abstract painter. I mean, that felt generous and felt like you felt like you could really disseminate a lot of money pretty easily. Guggenheim is 10 people or so. You actually don't know how many are given. You suggest a few names, and they, depending on how the grants go in other areas, there's a certain amount of money left over. So it throbs too. But there's so few. I was on American Academy Prix de Rome thing, and there were 2 grants. 2. Do you know what that means? 2 is nothing. How do you choose that?
Well, how many people applied for Guggenheim?
800.
Yeah. So you're picking 10 out of 800.
10 out of 800.
Now, you could
5 people. It's so you can't. There are no long shots in it. Not really.
Well, now you have gotten a lot of grants yourself,
yeah.
and have really, in a sense, had one kind of main source of your living come from that. If you had a choice between getting a grant or making sales, which would it be?
Sales. Yeah, it's different. It's you'd be surprised how hunks of money don't really change. It's what was great is. Well, it's something that Laura and I, we're on this other granting situation. The money doesn't ever get to you when you're desperate, and it's a problem. Guggenheim is different. It's sort of a mid-career grant. But the NEA needs to get money to very young people. And the New York Foundation should get money to very young people. By the time I know you're interesting, the world knows you're interesting. So, it's hard to get money in the right places. The time I got my grant, it was absolutely fabulous, but it wasn't as crucial as other times. So the grants are fabulous, and and they do say, your peers think you're good, but selling work is unbelievable. I mean, I don't buy work. Who has the money to buy that stuff? It's different, and the work is for this thing, and it's going someplace and being cared for. The first museum to buy a piece was a great thrill, So, but granting is weird. I just don't think grants have the ability to give the money in the right places. It functions as, and I'm telling you, the granting people who run it are incredible. They're very good. They try to do it honestly. They try to be fair. It's done as, if you have a suggestion of how to make it be better, they would do it. It's just not real easy to know where it's needed and when. So I keep thinking, give me some money to give away. Give Laura some money to give away. She knows, because she's with younger, musicians, or I might be I'm a teacher, so I know real little when it would do great stuff. So it's hard to give the money in the right places if you've got committees.
Now, you mentioned that the Whitney had bought one of your more recent remountable pieces, Supermercado, and right now at the moment you can see a great piece of yours at the Modern. You've been in a lot of exhibitions at the Whitney, several exhibitions at the Modern, lots of other places. What role do you think museums have to play in terms of the support of an artist such as yourself?
Museums are so slow. You really have to, that's committee, that's art by committee too, choices by committee. They're very, the first piece that was ever,
But like you
purchased
had
by
that
mine
piece
was
in
like a couple years ago.
75 in a Whitney biennial. You were in the 75 biennial. What did that do for you?
That was great, but that was publicity. That was like, and it was sort of an interesting, that was probably my time. If I had a time, I was flying. The work, it was wild. I wouldn't want to relive that, but in a funny way, it was so hot. That time I did a piece at the Hirshhorn, I did a piece at Holly's. The work was like it was no problem. Physically, I was a little exhausted, but it was, the momentum and the importance of making it was incredible. And there were wonderful works around me. And in that show, I felt very comfortable in that show. The latest show in the Whitney, I really was out of sync. And that show is about a time, a 2-year block of time. I don't think it was a curatorial mistake, but I looked funny. And I wished I had neighbors that made sense.
Barbara Kruger and Jeff Koons were your neighbors.
They were my neighbors. We looked like we were stinging out our tongues at each other mutually. I mean, it wasn't one doing it to everybody was doing it to everybody. It was the funniest combination.
You have quite definite sort of political and sort of humanistic points of view, and you're a very concerned person. I mean, you get very upset about certain things that are going on in the world and certain things that are going on right in New York. How do you feel you can bring that into your work?
It sort of doesn't. I don't know why. I mean, I worry about that. I'm always asked to give, make T-shirts for an AIDS benefit or, donate work for this or that. And I can donate work, but it never feels applicable, right? It doesn't feel like it addresses those problems, and it doesn't. So I don't know. I mean, I feel bad. Like, why can't I make, manifestos and come out for the right candidates and, know where but there isn't. It's funny, the work has always had a kind of, you said, it feels affirmative. And maybe, that's a certain kind of contribution, but it doesn't. My own psyche usually has, only in the most, I feel better now. I'm less emotional now than I was 5 years ago. So maybe there's some kind of overall decade-ness about, I'm in my 40s, so there's going to be a 40-ness about the work, but there isn't going to be, this week's drama or a message. I don't know.
I did, is when we've been talking at different times, talk about how your work is very affirmative. Do you buy into that description of it?
Now I do.
Did you buy into it? Would
No.
you buy into it
Earlier,
10 years
no.
ago?
Because I thought I was in this thing about making sculpture do things that sculpture wasn't at the time. Sculpture was always supposed to be truth to materials, opaque, solid, heavy, intellectual, and I wanted it to be. I really worked at thinking about making stuff which wasn't those things, and I used metaphors like water, like fire, to make sculpture, but that was being not solid, So, and I was wild about doing that. So I thought I was revolutionary in those kinds of things. Now, whether it is sculpture, isn't sculpture, I am not. And it is less sculpture now than it actually was back then, even though it looks more painterly. It probably was more sculptural.
In a second, we'll take some questions from all of you, but I have a couple more issues that I wanted to just ask you. You've been in New York for 15 years.
Yeah.
You arrived here as a really incredibly promising, though you may have seen yourself in a depression, but as an incredibly promising artist, recently graduated from Yale. How do you feel about New York sort of then and now?
Oh, we know the answer to this. It's very, very different. It's not only did everyone knew each other and met each other, and it really was the tiniest kind of neighborhood. And there was one place to eat, one place to drink, And I was saying to you, if I had to arrive into New York now and look at what it is, it's not a family for sure. It's even there's not even I guess it's a community, but it's much more business-like. It's much more professional. You have to be savvy in ways I'm just beginning to learn how to do. You have to eat well and talk well and know the right names and know who the good collectors are. It's just it's much different world. I don't like it as much. It really was another time. It really was.
But
You
think
I
agree, but could you as an artist live anyplace else?
No, because I don't feel weird in New York. I was like home instantaneously. I go into Detroit. I don't, it's not like I look weird or but I can tell if I don't do it right, they're gonna kind of think something's not, I'm so comfortable. I think everybody here feels pretty comfortable, who they are. You can be, you can be who you are quite easily. No one, because there's always someone infinitely more extreme than you. So you're like this norm, which is sort of interesting. No, I really love it. I love that I think this is home, for better or for worse.
Well, given the fact that you love New York, and given the fact that you as an artist feel that you are kind of perennially at home here, what would you say to a young artist who came in and might not have that same set of feelings? Or even if he or she did, what would you want to tell them just to kind of prepare them?
I think my friends have been they're so good. The ones I met then are the same ones now. They didn't change very much. That probably your peer group will get you, and you really can figure out your time with yourselves. And they probably don't need the kind of nostalgia that I need, and don't have the kind of loves that I have. And there is a different world. So I don't know. I guess it's friends. That's what I would say.
Well, now, do you feel out of sync?
I'm sort of, I think I understand, because it's not like I've lost contact, but I feel kind of relaxed for the first time. You like it, you don't like it, yes, that was a good piece, that was a lousy piece, it doesn't pull in the way it used to. It used to kill me if I read something that said that I was stupid or it was inconsequential or if it was not reviewed at all. And now I think, it makes sense, so I'm much more calm.
Do you think that's showing in your work?
Yeah, it looks pretty mature, I think. I don't know. Something looks a little bit more confident, I think.
Well, now the kind of frantic, amazing, nonstop energy that I think you have had and you continue to have, seems to be like real fuel for your work. Do you ever get a little nervous that that'll stop?
Nah. Because I'm not really mellowing. I mean, I'm mellowing a little bit, but it's when I do committee work, I can tell. It's still. Also, I can tell because I can work longer than my assistants, and they're 30 years younger at this point, 20 years younger. So, no. So it's never about it's not like physical. And it's not mentally. It seems that's fine too.
But your work does have a kind of thank you. Your work does have a kind of heavy-duty exuberance to it. Do you think it'll always have that character?
Not in exactly the same way, because I think that's changing throughout the. If I watch the slides, there is something that stays the same and something that really changes.
Do you have a sense of what your work will look like in 5 years?
I think it's going to be more organic again. I've been really looking at Rousseau. I don't know, like Rousseau, and I'm going to Italy. If it gets brown, I'm killing myself. But but something, like, I don't know. I hope it gets like a little metaphysical, because I think this kind of graphicness is not going to stay for very much longer.
Now, to sort of follow up on that question, one of the people wanted to know, when you begin these large works, do you know in advance in your head, through sketches and models, what the work is going to look like at the end?
No.
So you don't really have any real sense of it.
There's always, I drum up some, it's not like I walk into cold anywhere, When I went to Italy, I thought, I'm going to Italy. What to do for Italy? Make something Italian, I know. What's Italian? I don't know what's Italian. Futurists are Italian. Cones are very Italian, red, yellow, green, black, green, red, Italian. So, it starts, and then it came about this thing with, if it's cones and that sound and it's horns, and it was really like everything becomes this. It's like writing a book or something from just one word. It just snowballs, and by the end, I was making these things which I ended up meeting a guy who made. He repaired pipe organs, church organs, in New York, in Brooklyn, and I made this thing which I thought was really a frightening cone, and it sort of looked like the trident, it was ugly.
Like a missile.
It was like a missile, and it had this thing, and he came to my place and he said, that's the biggest bass note of this thing that he was repairing for some church somewhere. So there was, and he said, it's like that note is like in you and shakes you and is scary. It's like the scariest, most physical note.
So if the piece had become a pipe organ.
Yeah, it's sort of by the end of it, I sort of had little touches of figuring out about certain kinds of sound and form of sound, and the quality of, like, fear has a certain shape. Sharks look a certain way. I don't know. It just all snowballed. You can hear it. It just goes when it goes. So it starts kind of simple and with the most rudimentary set of parts, and then that just gathers,
So many of the comparisons that you made dealt with artists whose work looked like your work.
Yeah.
You didn't make that Léger, but you could have made that Léger on some level. Or the Jackson Pollock had a kind of energy which strikes many people, strikes me, strikes you as something that is part of your aesthetic lineage. One of these questions is sort of interesting because they were equating your work and its fascination with movement to someone like Susan Rothenberg's work and her fascination.
The new paintings. Yeah.
I mean, is it possible for you to like people whose work is radically different from your own?
Yes. Okay. My best friends make paintings this big. Bill Jensen, I think, is a great, great painter.
Or
very good
Ronnie
friend.
Bladen's
Ronnie
work, yeah.
Bladen.
He's having a wonderful show at Joan Washburn Gallery.
You should see it. He's a great artist. Just died, and he's so great. Oh yeah, I mean Susan. Yeah.
So the fact that the work looks like your work doesn't necessarily mean...
You told me to get these people to look like me.
The
I just did. I tried to do my best.
Made me do it. Because there are these, there are real equations to your work. I didn't tell you to get all those slides. I mean, some of those you did on your own. That's funny. But in point of fact, it is fascinating when an artist such as you could relate closely to an artist such as Susan Rothenberg, because ostensibly we might look at both works and say, well, these have nothing to do with each other, but they do.
Well, it was like that show that the Modern put together with like primitive objects and Picasso. I think sometimes those are the lamest ideas. Like if it looks like it, it must be the same thing. It is not the same thing. It's very different, White paintings next to another white painting don't mean that, white Twombly is not the same as a white Johns, So there is something about Bill Jensen's work that looks identical to me. There's something about Elizabeth Murray's work that looks identical. That's why we see each other. We see each other very well. Al Hell's work is identical to mine. Stella is further away to me, except superficially, and
the way it might
the way it looks is maybe identical, but in thinking we're like light years apart. It's so amazing. And I'm stuck. Every time I see one of his, I think it could be mine too. I mean, that I do this, what other people might do, I also make the same mistake.
But it should be said that you did that stuff before he did.
I don't know. I mean, it's, I think we're both, we both do work that occupies that kind of territory and space. And the new work, I think on some of the new work, maybe a little bit, but I got a lot from him, and I also like that he really, from going from black paintings, did those Indian birds, the most incredible color, incredible, and I love that. I love that it was flowers and birds. I love that, whether the thinking was something else. I love that the high voltage in that.
One of these questions kind of asks for some personal stuff. Sort of asked about your parents and how they might have influenced you, and it liberates me to say, you just got married relatively recently. You don't have any children. And I asked this question of Elizabeth before, talking about what role for a woman artist does marriage play, does children have? And she said, well, you can do it all, you can do it all. And then afterwards I was talking to somebody about the question and response, and they said, well, you should have said to her, Elizabeth immediately, well, who else has done it all? Who else
Very
has?
few. Elizabeth is something in that way, and she's been more productive and is, kinder, warmer, making better paintings than she ever has. And she made fabulous paintings before. I don't know of many people who do it all. But in my neighborhood, if you don't have a baby in a stroller, you really are out of touch. I mean, in Tribeca, I think there's this one park that if you go inside of it, you get pregnant. I don't know. It's like this place.
Well, better identify where it is, because there are a lot of people on the Upper East Side who'll come down. So it's great.
Greenwich, between Duane and Reed.
Do you teach anywhere now? Somebody wants to know.
No, I just got fired from Parsons.
Why?
I don't know. I had the best class. I was so good, I don't know. I think I make, without knowing it, I think that the students' work does not look like mine. They don't go painting the walls. I can't get them to put color on anything. I mean, I try, I pay them, but, it's not like they make work like mine at all. But I think that there's a strength that they get as people or as artists that might make, it might be an irritant.
You've taught at SVA. You've taught at so many places.
I've taught everywhere. Parsons. I quit Yale. I quit SVA. I've taught there at SVA for like 7 years. I quit that to do this Parsons thing.
And you just got fired?
Yeah.
It's a drag.
I don't know. You can't win.
Yeah, that deserves a drink of water.
Yeah.
Just one more question, and then we should probably go. But now, getting fired from a job like that. It obviously disappoints you because you don't For two reasons, it seems to me. You
Yeah,
don't
don't
have access.
make light of it. I was devastated.
Yeah.
I was devastated. I mean, don't get me on this, Patterson, but no, because I was so involved with the students. It was
Well,
the
that's
best
it.
job I ever had. I was teaching with Ronnie Blade, and I was teaching with Richard Van Buren. I was teaching with Jackie Bruckner. Good, you know, we had all bases covered. You have the, you know, it was fabulous, you know, and it's a good school, good artists. You know, I don't know. No, it really was upsetting because it was a full day of teaching. It wasn't like, you know, 2 days a week for 2 hours or 1 hour. It was like 8-hour days, 1 day a week. And we did great work, you know, they did great work. I happened to be able to watch that go on. And it was the best class I ever had of all the teaching I'd ever done. So I don't know what happened.
What always does amaze me, knowing some people who make art and knowing people who are quite far along in terms of what we would call relatively success, is that there is a kind of fearsome insecurity and like self-depreciation. I mean, you were always like self-deprecating. I mean, that's very noticeable. You know, like sort of putting down what is clearly incredibly remarkable, exuberant work and a phenomenal sort of record of achievement. Is that just going to be your companion forever? I mean, then you get like bad kind of evidence that may be your companion because you lose a job that you should have. Do you sense at any moment that you are a success?
I think I can tell because when I go to parties, people say, "Oh, I don't know, it's different." They used to like turn around on their heels. I mean, now it feels like I'm sort of, whether they like the work or not, like I'm a presence. You know, I'm in whatever world and however tiny this is, that I'm sort of in it, and that is, I love that feeling, and I love that feeling. Yeah. So I actually think, and I've got money now. I have money now, so it's, you know, that's also nice.
Well, I think we should all applaud a presence.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.